So thanks everybody for coming, first of all. Great to see you all here. For a few opening words now, we're going to have Ciarán Lynch, who I'm sure you all know already, but he's one of the local or local-ish TDs. I'm not entirely sure where the constituency boundary is, but it's close. So I'm going to invite now up Ciarán Lynch to do his few opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Jack. It is actually a local event because as soon as I'm leaving here, I have advice centres at 7 o'clock this evening, so excuse me for going. But to those of you who aren't familiar with the geography here, welcome to the People's Republic of Cork. And we're still fighting for independence. After winning Ireland independence back in 1921, we decided we discovered that she squandered it a couple of years ago and lost our sovereignty for us. So the next time we do it, we'll just do it on our own and we leave the rest of you with the Empire or whatever. But look, it's a great privilege to be here this evening, to be amongst friends and colleagues, and to be given the honour and privilege of opening the Tom Johnson's Summer School 2013 here in Cork City. And I very much appreciate the invitation, and I very much certainly recognise the honour of doing it. The theme of this year's weekend is From Lockout to Left Out, and may I commend the organisers in actually choosing this title. Given, I think this is really where we're actually at, and it is a team where some very, very serious questions can actually be asked and answered over this coming weekend, which I'm sure, given the history of the Tom Johnson weekend, will be very, very successful, will be very, very insightful, and will be, most importantly, very, very informed and enjoyable weekend. If I can maybe begin and speak about the tradition of the Labour Party and the tradition of Tom Johnson. And we have always seen ourselves as politicians who operate in an international family, and in that family of social democrats. Johnson in his day was somebody who saw politics in a world stage that was long before the time of Facebook and Twitter, and where you would have to write to Connolly, and from Liverpool maybe to Glasgow to Dublin, and the correspondence would arrive 2 weeks later. But nonetheless, the thoughts of that period are as valid now as they are then, although the transportation and the speed I see have already been tweeted before I got up here on the podium this evening. But even though the communications may have actually changed, the family to which these thoughts that Johnson actually has and which will be reflected this weekend are still alive and well. And it's in that context I want to speak this evening, maybe to lay out the landscape for the theme of this weekend, which from knockout to left out. And the Social Democrats, we have an obligation to display equality and fairness in all our political decisions. There we go, there's a tweet already after coming up and say something that's important. There's another tweet. So I better put this on silent in case I say anything controversial and it goes mad. So, since entering government, those decisions have to be reflected as well. And in making decisions relating to our economy are no different. And in our first 2 years in government, Irish Labour Party ministers, MPs and senators have had to make some very, very difficult economic decisions that have, unfortunately, and there's no question about this, had an adverse impact on some of the most vulnerable strands of society. And if we were locked out in 1913, we were locked out of the international bond markets in November 2010, and we have been fighting to get ourselves back into those markets. And there is no soft way of doing it, unfortunately, but there probably are ways of doing it that can be softer. And that's what I want to talk about this evening, that some of those decisions for us have not been easy, but they have not been taken lightly, and some of them are the dynamics of coalition government. But what these decisions have done, however, is that they have stabilised the country that was actually on the verge of economic collapse back in 2010. And now, as we begin to exit this bailout program, we need to start asking ourselves questions. And we have to start displaying a level of equity and a level of social responsibility, and that must be reflected in our policies, ones that are actually reflective of the social democratic tradition and that social democratic tradition across Europe. It would be fair to say at this time, if we do exit the bailout program at the end of the year or the start of next year, that Ireland will be at a crossroads. Europe is at a crossroads as well. And if we go back to the origins of the European model after 1945, it wasn't just about creating an economy, it was to create something in the aftermath of the Second World War that was as much a social model as it was an economic model. And where we are in Europe at this moment in time is that the model is very much about balancing the books. Europe has to be something greater and bigger than balancing the books. And it's no surprise that the type of narrative that has been applied in Europe in recent years has been a narrative that has come out of the Christian Democrat tradition, whether it was Merkel, Sarkozy, or whether it was Ciarán, or Cameron in Britain. We have to change the dialogue that's taking place in Europe. And comments like austerity isn't working. It might be grand on a poster, but it's not a policy. And we need to have democratic legitimacy and democratic integrity to what we're actually talking about, rather than saying austerity isn't working. We have to have an economic model, and we have to have a narrative around that economic model. So as we work our way out of the Baylor program, it's time, and it's no accident what President Higgins is actually saying in Europe when he goes to meetings. That language is coming from Eamon Gilmore's office. Since we have come to power, the Labour Party in government has been working steadfastly over the last 2 years to change that narrative across Europe. We have set out a message, not just in terms of restoring our international reputation, but that Europe is something greater than just balancing the budget sheet. And the raison d'etre of Europe isn't the balance sheet. The raison d'etre of Europe is the great social inclusion model, the model that has actually developed the greatest standard of living that the world has actually known across the region. And what has given Europe that model is, it's feeling away, that's very good. It has been the situation whereby that has come out of the social democratic tradition. If we look at what has actually happened in Europe in the last 50 years, or if we look at Europe, what has actually happened, if we go back to the time of Tom Johnson, Europe has gone through a process of industrialization over the last 150 years. In the last 50 years as such, we have improved people's standards of living quite significantly. But more importantly, if we look at other regions that are now currently going through the level of industrialization that Europe has and that Ireland is actually going through, we see it in China. That China now is arriving within a 20-year time frame to a level of economy and a level of industrialization that is equivalent to the West. But the social model that has taken 50 years to develop in Europe hasn't taken place there. And it may not take place there. And the type of privileges that we in Europe come to enjoy have come on the back of efforts from people, particularly from people like Tom Johnson. They have set out the narrative over the decades. And we cannot assume that we're entitled to those privileges in the future unless we actually fight to maintain them and fight to improve them. And that is a battle that we have here in Europe, and that to work upon and to work on conditions. It is, I see Kathleen's arrived, so I can nearly know if there's an inner constituency, I can hand over the north side of the People's Republic of Cork to Kathleen in a moment before I get to leave. But in terms of developing that narrative, I think there are other things that we need to do as well. We need to look at how business is actually done in this country. Ireland is booming on the international export market. We're actually in an export boom. We're meeting record figures that we didn't even have at the height of the property bubble. But domestic demand and domestic business in this country is down. And what I would be saying to people in the SME sector and the business sector is the type of politics that we offer is actually good for business. It's not just good for community, it's good for business. And the reason why it's good for business is because we offer a sustainable economic model. Not one that's built on boom and bust, but one that shares the dividend between employers and employees, and one that actually creates sustainable financial and government policy type of infrastructures. But I think what needs to happen most of all is, for a lot of people out there, they're asking the question, when will this end? And that kind of comes to the theme that people feel left out. When is this going to end? And it's critical for us in government to actually start putting the type of social dividend that is synonymous with our type of political history back onto the agenda. And we start putting types of social dividends in place in the horizon. And some of that has actually happened. Joan Burton, who will be here later this evening, under her watch, during our term of the European presidency, the Youth Guarantee Scheme was put in place. A very, very necessary measure right across Europe, where there are unemployment levels of 30% plus in some countries and there are 25% plus. And the necessary finances that were actually found for that were found because we actually had a social democratic minister for social welfare in power during the presidency to actually get that goal over the line. So I'm going to bring my thoughts to a conclusion here, ladies and gentlemen. But I think one of the greatest things that is facing us over the next couple of years, and particularly as we exit the bailout program, and particularly as Europe starts to move beyond the balance sheet, which it has to, that has to happen, is that the time has come for us on the left, us in the social democratic tradition, us in the tradition of St. Johnson, Connolly and others, to start reshaping the narrative of Europe, start reshaping the type of policies of Europe, but most importantly, start reshaping Europe back to what it actually was about an inclusive society, about a stable political region, that is about improving the lifestyles of its citizens, and one of improving the lives of workers, improving the lives of families, and improving the opportunities that both young people and people who actually work in and live in the region actually have access to and have the opportunity to. So with that said, Chairperson, I'd like to thank you once again for the invitation to come here this evening to open this great occasion. It's a great honour to do so. I wish you well over the weekend. I'm sure you'll be up talking very, very late tonight and tomorrow night. I hope to be talking very, very serious politics with some of you tomorrow night myself after the evening. But it's a great weekend, and I'm very, very happy that you've chosen Cork as your venue for this year. The best of luck to you, and the best of success, and the best of enjoyment while you're here in Cork. Thank you.